Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Today we're going to talk about the relationship between customer experience and employee experience, and how companies need to provide their teams with the right tools to make both successful, as well as to enable success in digital product rollouts. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Hensley, author, speaker, co-founder, and CEO at Emerge, and author of Alignment: Overcoming Internal Sabotage and Digital Project Failure. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
Yeah, looking forward to talking here. So let's get started by talking about this relationship between customer experience and employee experience. How would you define this relationship?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think something that really has to be well defined. So the way I look at it is great customer experience is a direct result of the employee experience. Or another way to think of it is employee engagement and empowering people to do their job to the best of their ability.
What are some of the challenges that occur, because of this relationship between the two, between CX and EX?
Well, I think a lot of time there's this kind of duality that happens within an organization where there is many functions are really focused on one side of things that are driving, revenue and supporting customer experience, and then there's the other side that's really thinking about operational spending and trying to mitigate costs. And the reality is great customer experience and employee experience is the driver of both. It really does drive revenue and efficiency. And so when you look at, depending on what type of research are reading, highly engaged employees are organizations are outperforming their competitors by anywhere between 100 to 147%. So that a level of engagement that you can get with an empowered workforce, a team of collaborators and people that are creating and innovating and problem solving are incredibly important to the health of an organization and really making sure that they can, do the right work at the right time in the best possible way.
When we talked before this interview, you had highlighted that the product team has a pretty key role in this relationship, not only between customer experience and employee experience, but even individual, with employees needing to get their work done, and product is so key to some of these things. And I would say in a lot of the material and a lot of the talks that I hear about CX and EX, often overlooked. Can you expand on this and just kind of your take on why this is so critical to understand?
Now, I think, product leaders today are being asked to do more than ever. And when you think about whether it's a, externally facing product or internal, product teams are bringing together this unique set of skills around business acumen, critical design thinking and problem solving, and critical problem solving with technology and engineering. And so it allows them to really, take an incredible point of view on experience, design, and implementation, no matter what side of it it's on. And what you're seeing today is the highest performing companies are doing a couple of things. They're tearing down now the silos across functions of the organization. So one example of that might be around, for example, customer acquisition, something that traditionally falls into the camp of marketing and sales. Well, more and more organizations are moving towards product-led growth or product-led modernization if it's from the internal side. And that requires product teams to be owners of these experiences and then in deep collaboration with marketing and sales collaboration with, HR, collaboration with customer success teams, or other supporting employee experience teams. And so the product teams becomes almost this nucleus for being able to really deliver on these experiences, because they're not just being asked to create the solutions, they're being asked to maintain them and
Yeah.
and continuously drive innovation and improvement. And so they're working on both sides of both the customer experience and employee experience at all times. And that becomes so crucial when you think of the viability of an organization. I mean, one challenge that a product team is being asked to do today, as a really good example, is information in the organization is usually siloed or distributed across systems. And more organizations are trying to consolidate that information or integrate those systems so they have a true source of truth, for whatever it may be. We'll just use customer information as the example. Well, if you provide that source of truth, what you're doing for employees is you're empowering them to have a complete picture of the customer, which means they can answer questions better. They can make better decisions about how to support them or to drive the benefits of your product or service and deliver on your promises. It unlocks so many possibilities for employees and moves them from being reactionary to being able to be proactive, because the tools are giving them in essence, the critical context and information necessary to do their job at the best of their abilities.
Do you think that the product teams often see their role as, because there's we've kind of highlighted that there is some kind of disconnect. I guess what do you think it is? Is it that the product teams don't necessarily see their role as so central, or is it the inverse, that they're kind of not given the credit they deserve, or maybe a combination of both? Like, where do you see the biggest breakdown?
Well, I would say there's two major things that I see. One is they're asked to do a lot, but not necessarily given the authority or power within the organization.
Yeah.
So that's one issue that I see quite often. The second one is that many product teams are still set up to be delivery focused
Mm.
versus outcome focused. And you see organizations that are really thriving, I mean, excelling in every way. Their teams are all outcome focused. They've really said, okay, we understand deliverables have to get done, timelines are important, resources need to be critically managed, but they consider those table stakes. What's more important is, will these deliverables move the organization forward? Will it help employees do their job better? Will it provide a better customer experience? Will it make the company more resilient to competition? They're really looking for, what is the critical outcome that has to take place for all of this effort to be worthwhile. And when that mental shift is so critical to really making sure that the teams are set up for success and are aligned to deliver the results that leaders are asking for.
So let's change gears for a little bit and talk about some of the concepts in your book called alignment. Your book discusses why many digital product rollouts fail to meet objectives, as well as how leaders can have greater success. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned in your interviews for the book, as well as your own experience?
Sure. So, you know, the book was kind of 20 years in the making, to be honest. So
Yeah.
the original idea behind the book, was to really do a deep dive into understanding why so many products and services fail, and especially within the context of digital product and digital transformation. And when I really started to dig into understanding the root causes of failure, you saw that there was just this constant theme coming to the surface of those who had dealt with these failure and the repercussions of that failure, and that misalignment was preventing the best ideas from being realized. It was eroding teams, and it was crippling great leaders and ruining entire organizations in some cases. And so when we really started to look at alignment, we started to look at, well, what's the difference between leaders and organizations that are constantly beating the odds? And to put that in context, depending on the body of research you look at it, and when it comes to product success, anywhere between about 72 to 90% of new product initiatives fail. which is a staggering amount.
Yeah. Wow.
So if the failure rate is that high, what are we not learning that we need to be learning? And usually the concepts are talked about in, well, there wasn't market fit. Well, there's a lot of things that happen developing a product or service, to that you can do along the way to establish, markers of success and indicate market fit. So in interviewing these leaders who were beating the odds, not just once or twice, but a dozen times throughout their careers, or organizations that were not one-offs, and leaders who had built organizations, one successful company, sold it, starts another one, another successful company. This issue of alignment was right at the surface. And so some of the failures that they were able to overcome with alignment were issues of they really made sure that they knew who their customer was and the true scope of the problem that they were solving for that customer and the impact that problem had on their lives or in the work that they did.
Yeah.
They really could get to the root cause of, as our organization scales, that we have to manage expectations and challenges that come about when you take optimism or a bullish approach or ego, and how that gets in the way of proper expectations, which is so critical for teams to be grounded in the work that they do. Or being able to understand that siloed knowledge is an inhibitor of success. And so you need to be having people actively working to break down those silos or build bridges between the functions of that organization to pull out that incredible institutional knowledge so that everybody can benefit from that opportunity.
Where does process fit into this? I mean, so, definitely, products can't be successful on their own, right? So definitely you mentioned the people component of it, but how can process help as well?
Well, I think process is absolutely essential. I mean, one example is that strategy. So great product strategy. Strategy is one of these things that's kind of a buzzword in a lot of ways. It's
Right.
often misunderstood. I mean, there's a whole subgenre of content talking about strategy in all of its different contexts. Um, but some of the basics are strategy is often mistaken for goals or mistaken for planning.
Yeah.
And these things, none of that has to do with strategy. Um, and so when you build processes around things, it creates in that context, without a solid foundation of strategy, you are setting up a false sense of security, which is dangerous. So process, I think, is incredibly important, and the process of strategy is just a great example of it. Strategy is not a one-time thing, it's episodic. If you're building a product and your market moves fast, you might be working on strategy all the time. In other cases, maybe it's once a year. Just depends on how fast your organization and how fast your market moves. But there's an essential foundation to great strategy that is kind of the underpinning to everything that you do. And it's part of that process, or one of the processes, as an example, is never falling in love with your solution and making sure that you fall in love with the problem.
Mm.
That continuous discovery and driving of insight to understand not just what your customers do, but why they do the things that they do with your product or service, and how the challenges of that you're helping them resolve are impacting them in their organization.
Yeah.
That's a never-ending process.
Talking about measuring success, right? So, you said which I think that figure is just staggering. That so high a percentage of product rollouts fail. So we kind of know when something doesn't work. We might kind of feel when something is working, but how do you actually measure success of whether it's digital transformation, whether it's product rollout, or some combination of all of it? How do you measure things so that you don't get too far along and realize looking back that you failed, or something like that? Like, what are some of the metrics that work to meaningfully measure some of this stuff?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to go about it. So from a product, like a core product strategy perspective, measurement of progress needs to be something that's tangible and owned by the team.
Yeah.
And so you're looking for something like that, a leading indicator. So, an example is a lot of times we see, we'll measure performance or success by revenue or by how many customers we acquire in the next, 60 days or 6 months. And the challenge with that is that those are all leading or lagging indicators. They don't give us any opportunity within that time period to really start to refine and make adjustments as necessary. And the product team might help influence customer acquisition, but they don't actually control customer acquisition. That's delegated to another function. They're a key contributor. So it's difficult for a product team to start to then who's being held accountable to a metric that they can't control.
Yeah.
So we really try to look at, well, what are the things that they can control and what are the things that they can help with? And so one of the strategies that I'm a big fan of is this idea of product-led growth. The the concept of product-led growth is a term that was coined by OpenView, which is a venture capital group out of Boston. And how do you create a product that's so sticky, that's so valuable that it drives its own measure of growth? And if, for example, if your marketing team and sales team is doing a phenomenal job at acquiring customers, but they're not actually adopting the product, your revenue is going to show it. So you've missed
Yeah.
that metric of revenue. So we love to look for measures that, what can we understand is the user doing within the first 7 days, 14 days, 30 days? What are the stages of product adoption? What are the levers that a product team can pull on to improve the product and to drive retention? And then when they see certain things happening, trigger that to maybe like a customer success team that says, oh, I better reach out and see if I can support this. We see that, you know, if this isn't happening, there may be a point of friction or struggle that the customer is going through. Let's make sure we're there for them.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of things that product teams do control often and can really be incredible measures for making sure that they're always moving the organization and the product forward.
What are some of the ways that they can just try to ensure success from the beginning? Like, what are some things that are often overlooked when there's still time to plan and things like that?
Well, so one of the things that we see the most often, which I think is a good indicator that drives towards market fit when you talk about specifically rollout, is this idea of who is the user of the product. And it's so often that can start, well, like, oh, well, this is valuable for anybody. Well, that may be true, but if it's something for everybody, then it might have not enough. Then maybe you don't understand either the problem well enough, or you're too generic, and so you're going to get lost in the noise of the market space. So we really look at, first off, who have you really brought focus to your product? Do you really know who your core customer is? The group that has the absolute most demand for your product or service. Does that group have the size and spending power necessary to be successful? Are they identifiable? Can you actually find them and connect with them in a reasonable and scalable way? Are these individuals or organizations accessible through the channels that you can communicate through or participate in? And do they have a similar behavior for the way that they buy or use a similar product or service? Those are kind of cornerstones, if you will, of making sure that you're focused on a core market that you can actually get traction with as you roll it out. And so we kind of first look at those fundamentals and really help leaders understand that. The next piece is really understanding the buyer journey itself. And if you want to understand that core customer, what's the journey that you're taking them through from building awareness to evaluating your product or service, adopting that product or service, and then driving retention. And then you get into this retention life cycle, which is all about what we talked a little bit about, what happens in those 7 days, 30 days, 90 days, and so on. And so that becomes really key to understanding how you build viability into the way you think about designing your product, testing your product before it goes to market, and then eventually bringing it to market. And then you have the mechanisms in place, the processes, to really make sure that you can be gathering continuous insight and feedback and fine tuning that as your product is gaining exposure in the market.
Well, one last question before we wrap up here. As a fellow author, I always like to hear about the process people go through to write their books. So at a meta level, I guess, can you talk about the process of writing, what you learned through that process, and even what you might do differently next time?
Absolutely. So the process of writing the book I found absolutely just exhilarating. My favorite part of the process was definitely for me doing the research and the interviews.
Yeah.
Being able to connect and learn from people is something that I just really, really enjoy. I think what I didn't account for, not having been an author of a book before this, is just the sheer amount of time to distill down the content so that you can make it accessible to people.
Yeah.
That time and that commitment was much more than I anticipated. It took me 2 years to write the book. Part of that due to COVID,
Yeah. Yeah.
but um, the if I could have done it differently, I think what I would have done is I would have maybe just stepped away from the business for you know kind of planned increments where I could really just deep dive. Because the more I had that space versus working in smaller chunks, I learned that I could just how much more I could get done and how much more I just even personally enjoyed the writing experience and the process.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, and it's I've done it kind of both ways, and I agree with you. Having some space lets you get a handle on the bigger picture, right? So sometimes working incrementally, like I can knock out a chapter or part of a chapter here or there, but to really kind of make sense of the book, from start to finish. Like, did you have a sense of like the arc that the book was going to have until you were able to take some space and do that, or how did kind of the structure of the book come together?
Well, so ironically, I originally the original title for the book was Friction, and I was going to write it about just the research on failure.
Yeah.
It, but when I went through and I actually had hundreds of pages of transcripts taped up in a large conference room, and I started going through and just highlighting and going through all of it, I found that the content found its own alignment basically, and I realized that there was a much different narrative and arc that needed to unfold here. And from having interviewed all of these wonderful people from all these different disciplines, and so that was really interesting to me because I came in with one idea, and I realized that I just had to let that piece go. It became a part of the book, but not really the book itself. I really had to let the insights that I thought were most valuable in what was coming up thematically through these interviews and these people who had consistently overcoming these odds were bringing to the surface in their conversations. And that structure of and being able then to look at how that insight could be organized collectively became the structure for the book.
That's cool. Yeah, I found it. Sometimes these things take a life of their own. That's so good that you had the freedom to be able to pivot a bit there and tell the story that kind of became apparent, right? That's great to hear.
Yeah, it was wonderful to have the freedom, and candidly, last year one of the blessings of having the extra time was to make sure that the narrative could come to fruition in the way that was coming through from all of the interviews and the research.
Yeah. Great. Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for joining. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
The best way to stay in touch is come find me on LinkedIn, posting content and engaging in Q&As there all the time. They can also go to emergeinteractive.com, and we have a ton of free resources for product leaders or people interested in improving their existing products or services that's available there. And they can sign up for a monthly newsletter that's available as well.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Jonathan Hensley, author, speaker, co-founder, and CEO at Emerge, and author of Alignment, Overcoming Internal Sabotage and Digital Product Failure. Thanks again for listening to The Agile World with Greg Kihlstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.